Hey, what's up guys? Alex here with a new video, and today we're going to be doing my first impressions on the new Fujifilm X-T5 after using it for a week. As you can see, I don't have the camera on me. I actually rented this camera for a week. I used it for one portrait session, and I actually took it with me to New York City to have it as my everyday camera and to do a little bit of street photography. If you're new to the channel, I am a portrait photographer based out of Orlando, Florida. And as Chelsea Northrup would say, I'm polycamerous. I primarily shoot Sony. I also own a Canon R6 Mark II and a Leica M11, so it's safe to say I love camera gear. I actually used to own a Fuji X-T3, X-T4, and the X Pro 2, so I'm very familiar with the system. When the X-T4 came out, I was very disappointed. That camera came out with very buggy firmware, and the autofocus just was not accurate, and that bothered me so much. I actually owned that camera for about a month before I ended up selling it because I was that disappointed with the autofocus system. So when Fuji announced the new X-T5 with its latest autofocusing system, its latest highest resolution sensor ever made in an APS-C sensor at 40 megapixels, I was super excited. Fuji does have kind of a way to do things, so they usually come out with a new sensor and they slowly roll it out into all their camera bodies. They rolled it out at first with the XH2, which is like their new pro body that you're able to now add a battery grip and really rig it out. And the X-T5, for the first time, you're actually unable to add a battery grip, and they actually made it a little smaller and lighter. So Fuji's clearly kind of creating lanes. So if you're like a pro shooter and you need those extra features, go with the XH2. More casual, or even, I think pros could still use the X-T5, you just can't have a battery grip. Less video features. Again, they're slowly kind of carving out lanes. For me, I rented this camera because I wanted to see what the new Fuji sensor is about, the new AF, and to see if when this sensor comes to the X Pro 4, which is a body style I prefer over the XT system, it's a rangefinder style, it looks a little cooler in my perspective, if that's a camera I would pick up. With all that being said, I'm going to share my thoughts, and before I do that, I'll let you know that I'll be putting up images I shot with the camera, and I'll also include some for you to download and play with yourself. And with that being said, let's kick things off. So the new autofocusing system on the X-T5 actually surprised me. It worked really well. I would say that the new AEF system is about 90% there to its competitors. So when you look at Sony and Canon, I think those are leading the pack. I think the Fuji's like 90% caught up to those systems. It's still not as fast to acquire focus, but when it acquires focus, it does nail it pretty consistently, and I wasn't ever disappointed by having missed shots after kind of reviewing my photos after I imported them. So really impressed that Fuji has done that. I'm more impressed that Fuji has done that in the launch firmware, because they usually launch cameras and they're pretty buggy. They get better over time with firmware, so the fact that this AF system is 90% there with launch firmware tells me that in the next 6 to 8 months, it's only going to get better and possibly faster. So that's a good thing. But image quality, that's where it's at. So this new sensor is actually pretty incredible. You can get really detailed photos. The colors are still there. And overall, I was really impressed by the image quality in this tiny body. The fact that you now have 40 megapixels in such a compact body is pretty incredible. I really enjoyed all the images I got, and there's only 2 negatives I would say, actually just maybe 1 negative and 1 kind of in between that I would knock on this camera. The first one is dynamic range. So the dynamic range is pretty decent, but it's not as good as a full frame body, right? And I'm comparing this to the R6 Mark II or the Sony a7 IV, entry-level full frame cameras that are almost relatively close in price to the X-T5 or XH2. Dynamic range just is not close to the competitors. Now, again, we're comparing APS-C versus full frame, so we got to factor that in. I usually like underexposing my photos, half a stop to a full stop, so I can retain highlight detail and just kind of pick up the shadows later. This camera can totally do that. Half a stop, 1 stop, it will do just fine. If you push it over one stop, you will get significantly more noise in the shadows, and that's a bummer. I am used to pushing images sometimes up to 2 stops on the Sony or Canon, and I still have tremendous image quality. So just a limitation. I wouldn't say it's a bad thing against a smaller sensor, but it's just not there with kind of the competition as far as full frame sensors go. The second thing, this one's actually a very disappointing one, and I should have known, right? You have a high megapixel sensor, which means ISO is gonna take a hit. So this camera, I would not use it comfortably past ISO 1600, and that is a bummer. ISO 3200 actually looks worse than ISO 6400 in most modern day full frame cameras, and then ISO 6400 is just completely unusable in my opinion. I will be doing a comparison between this camera and its full frame competitors in my next video, so stay tuned if you want to see some of that. But I will say that I was very disappointed that ISO 1600 is probably the max I'd feel comfortable shooting this camera. But again, no tool is perfect, and as long as you know its limitations, you can work around them. So after using this camera for a week, what are my thoughts? I think I'll sum it up like this. I didn't want to send this camera back. And I will say this, when I first got it, I wasn't really gung-ho about it. I was pretty negative. There's so much hype around Fuji right now, and to be honest, I don't get it. So when I had this camera, I even messaged a friend, and I was like, I don't understand the hype around these cameras. But after using it, especially in New York when I was carrying it throughout the whole day in my shoulder, and not once did it get heavy, and realizing that in this super small compact package, I was getting killer results and almost weighs nothing, that's when I started to really kind of fall in love with the system. Again, I've never been a fan of the XT bodies, I've been more of a fan of the X Pro bodies. So when this sensor comes to the X Pro 4, I'll probably be picking it up. I enjoyed it that much. Now, all the images you've seen have been edited with my preset. I did not use any of Fujifilm's film simulations, and this is all preference. I did enjoy seeing the photos in the back of the camera with a Fujifilm film simulation. For me though, I like having a standard look across all my work, so I just edit everything with my preset. I do think that having those Fujifilm recipes and all the film simulations are really inspiring when using the camera because you're able to adjust and tweak different looks, and that really gets you to shoot more, which is, I think, the most important part, right? When you have a camera like this, you want to shoot it, you want to take a lot of pictures, and when you're able to tweak the colors behind the camera, I think it can inspire you to actually shoot things you normally wouldn't shoot. As far as editing goes, if you want to shoot JPEG, I hear they're great. I'm not going to do that, but what's cool is you can also add the Fujifilm simulations in Lightroom or Capture One, so you can still shoot RAW and add that look later, which is the route I would go personally. Anyways, at the end of the day, I didn't want to return this camera, and I was very, very impressed. But if you've used the new X-T5 or the new XH2, what are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you're interested in seeing how this camera holds up to the Canon R6 Mark II and the Sony a7 IV, hit the subscribe button down below. This comparison is actually very interesting. But as always, guys, thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Have a good one, guys. Peace.